In the Middle East, rival Palestinian factions Fatah and Hamas have announced a reconciliation deal after a meeting in the Gaza Strip. They have agreed to begin negotiations to form a unity government within the coming weeks. And this comes as peace talks between the Fatah party of President Mahmoud Abbas and Israel face collapse. And this is not the first time the two sides have tried to reconcile since their violent split in 2007. But such agreements were never implemented. As President Barack Obama begins his Asian tour, the U.S. leader has assured Japan that islands at the center of its territorial dispute with China are covered by a bilateral defense treaty. In an interview ahead of the tour, Mr. Obama said the U.S. would oppose any attempt to undermine Japan's control over the islands. U.S. officials have made such comments in the past, but this is the first time Mr. Obama has given such explicit support. He arrived in Japan today ahead of stops in 3 other Asian nations. Mr. Obama is not going to Beijing, but relations with China are expected to dominate his meetings with regional leaders. Deadly protests have broken out in the Brazilian city of Rio de Janeiro following the death of a young man allegedly beaten by the police. A man was shot dead during the violence on Tuesday night in the Pavio Zorrino neighborhood, and demonstrators from the favela set barricades of tires alight, leading to the closure of streets in the nearby tourist area of Copacabana. The violence comes weeks before Brazil hosts the Football World Cup.
The sound of gunfire.
And now we're in Africa. We will start here in Nigeria. The teaching of Islam as propagated by the Holy Prophet Muhammad is a far cry from what is practiced by Islamist extremists who hide under religion to perpetrate violence. These were the comments by Nobel laureate Professor Wole Soyinka during his address at the World Book Capital 2014 held in Port Harcourt, Rivers State. Professor Soyinka, who narrowed down his address to the situation in the Northeast, also advised Nigerians not to isolate themselves from the situation in that part of Nigeria.
The true Muslim, the authentic strength of the descendants of the Prophet Muhammad, pride themselves as people of the book. Hence those lovingly preserved manuscripts of Timbuktu, treasured and tendered through generations of scholars and believers. In such circumstances, what side do we take when children are slaughtered in their school dormitories, their teachers and parents hunted down for daring to disobey the Philistinic fatwa that forbids learning? Do we remain in our barracks? For it has not just begun, you know. We're speaking of the prosecution of war that 4 years ago already had moved to its present blatant intensity. That it has attained its now staggering figures of casualties that numb our humanity with the abduction of female pupils to serve as beasts of burden for the enemy does not disguise past failures, self-inculpating silence, and even tacit collaboration in places. Try as we might, we cannot insulate ourselves from the horrors to which our children are daily exposed, fearful to undergo, even for our own instruction, the vicarious anguish of others.
Nobel laureate Professor Wole Soyinka. We're now in Egypt, where a bomb blast has rocked the capital, Cairo, killing a senior police officer. Security officials say Brigadier General Ahmed Zaki died when an explosive device placed under his official vehicle was detonated in the western suburb of 6 October City. In Alexandria, a second officer was shot dead during a raid on what officials said was a militant hideout. Jihadist militants have stepped up attacks on security personnel and killed hundreds since the army ousted President Mohamed Morsi last July. The insurgency threatens security ahead of May's presidential election, which former military chief Abdel Fattah al-Sisi is expected to win. The United States has condemned the massacre of hundreds of civilians in South Sudan, saying the dastardly act is an abomination and a betrayal of the people by their leaders. Rebels have denied a UN report that they killed civilians after taking over the oil hub of Bentiu last week. The U.S. statement said President Salva Kiir and rebel leader Riek Machar must make it clear that such attacks are unacceptable. A January ceasefire deal has failed to halt violence that began in December. More than 1 million people have since been forced from their homes. South Africa's public broadcaster has refused to broadcast the campaign message from the Economic Freedom Front, saying it incites violence. However, the South African Broadcasting Corporation, SABC, denied that it was banned because it came from the EFF. The advert calls for people to destroy e-tolls, a controversial new road tolling system. The EFF, set up by ex-ANC youth leader Julius Malema, is contesting an election for the first time next month. Mr. Malema likened the SABC's action to those used by apartheid government, which censored messages with anti-government sentiments. However, SABC spokesman Kaisa Kanyago said it was to do with regulations, not politics.